I was 32 years old, a successful software developer, with what I thought was the perfect relationship. Natalie, my beautiful 29-year-old fiancée, had been by my side for 3 years, planning our dream wedding. My father, Richard, a wealthy 58-year-old business owner, had always been complicated. But nothing prepared me for walking into his house that day 1 week before my wedding and finding them together. The shock and betrayal crushed me instantly, shattering everything I believed about family and love. Before I tell you how I made my dad regret his actions on his last day alive, let me know where you are watching from. And hit that subscribe button so you do not miss how this family betrayal ends. I met Natalie at a charity fundraiser 3 years ago. She was standing alone by the dessert table, looking slightly uncomfortable in the crowd of Seattle elites. I approached her with 2 glasses of champagne, and our conversation flowed so naturally that 3 hours passed before we even noticed. She was a marketing executive with a quick wit and infectious laugh. We shared the same values, both wanting a small family, a house in the suburbs, and careers that challenged us without consuming our lives. We built a life together in Portland, where I had a job at a tech firm and she worked remotely for her marketing agency. Our relationship felt effortless compared to my previous ones. We rarely fought, and when we did, we resolved issues through open communication rather than letting resentment build. I proposed at the waterfall where we had our first date, and her tearful yes made me believe I had finally found my forever. The wedding plans were nearly complete. Just 1 week away, we had finalized everything from the caterer to the honeymoon plans. We had decided on a relatively small ceremony, with about 100 guests, mostly close friends and family. Natalie had been handling most of the details, showing me options and asking for input rather than forcing me into wedding planning sessions. My relationship with my father had always been strained. Richard was a self-made millionaire who built his construction company from nothing. He was also a notorious womanizer who cheated on my mother repeatedly throughout their marriage. Growing up, I would see the pain in my mother's eyes whenever he came home late or left for spontaneous business trips. She knew we all knew, but she stayed with him, believing a broken family would be worse than a broken marriage. My mother fell into a deep depression when I was in high school. She would spend days in bed, barely eating or speaking. My father, instead of supporting her, grew increasingly distant. By the time I was 19 and in my second year of college, she took her own life. I found her when I came home for a weekend visit. My father was conveniently away on business. Richard offered little emotional support after her death. He arranged a lavish funeral, paid for grief counselors I never went to see, and then expected life to go on. He never spoke of his role in her depression. When I confronted him once, he dismissed it, saying she had always been emotionally fragile and that he had provided a good life for us. His definition of provision was purely financial. Despite all this, I tried to maintain some relationship with him. He was my only living parent, and I kept hoping that someday he would acknowledge the pain he had caused. But Richard had another troubling characteristic. He was intensely competitive, especially with me. When I graduated with honors, he reminded me that he had built a multi-million-dollar company without a college degree. When I got promotions, he would point out how much more he was worth. He always needed to feel superior. With the wedding approaching, we had been making attempts at reconciliation. Richard seemed genuinely pleased about my engagement, though he made several comments about how Natalie was out of my league. He offered to pay for the wedding, which I declined. Still, he insisted on contributing something and ended up paying for the honeymoon, a 2-week trip to Bali. I reluctantly accepted, wanting to believe he was finally making an effort. The day everything fell apart was supposed to be ordinary. I had returned early from my bachelor party weekend. My friends had planned 3 days at a lakeside cabin, but I decided to come back a day early to help Natalie with last-minute wedding details. I stopped by my father's house first to pick up the wedding rings. We had decided to use my grandparents' rings, which were kept in my father's safe. When no one answered the door, I used my spare key. The house seemed quiet, but I noticed 2 wine glasses on the kitchen counter and Natalie's distinctive perfume in the air. A A chill ran down my spine. I heard noises from upstairs, faint at first, then unmistakable. Part of me wanted to leave immediately to pretend I had never arrived. But I found myself moving up the stairs, as if pulled by some invisible force. The master bedroom door was partially open, and there they were, my father and my fiancée, the two people I should have been able to trust most in the world. They scrambled to cover themselves when they saw me, their faces a mixture of shock and guilt. Natalie began crying immediately, repeating that it was not what it looked like, despite the obvious evidence to the contrary. My father even then tried to maintain his control, telling me to calm down so we could discuss this like adults. I did not yell. I did not cry. I simply turned and walked out, ignoring their calls. As I drove away, my phone began buzzing with texts and calls from both of them. But I could not bear to read or answer any of them. The woman I had planned to spend my life with, and the man who gave me life, had just destroyed everything I believed about love and family. I drove aimlessly for hours, eventually checking into a hotel when darkness fell. The shock had worn off enough for the pain to set in, a deep, visceral ache that made it difficult to breathe. My phone continued to buzz throughout the night. I finally looked at it around 3 in the morning, scrolling through desperate messages. From Natalie, "Please talk to me. It was a terrible mistake. I love you, not him." From my father's son, "We need to discuss this like rational adults. Things got out of hand. Call me." Their attempts at explanation only made me feel more sick. I lay awake all night, replaying our relationship in my mind, wondering how long this had been going on, wondering if there had been signs I had missed. The next morning I called Alex, my best friend and would-be best man. I needed someone to talk to before I completely lost my mind. We met at a diner far from my usual haunts, where I was unlikely to run into anyone I knew. Alex arrived looking worried, having received cryptic texts from Natalie asking if he had heard from me. "Simon, what the hell happened? Natalie has been blowing up my phone. Your dad called me too." Something about a misunderstanding when I told him what I had walked in on. His face went pale. Then, to my surprise, he looked away, suddenly very interested in his coffee mug. "What? What are you not telling me?" I demanded. "I did not know for sure," Alex began hesitantly. "There were rumors, man. A couple people mentioned seeing them together at the Westlake a few weeks ago, looking pretty friendly. I thought it was just people talking trash. I should have said something." The Westlake was an upscale hotel downtown. The realization that this was not a one-time thing, that they had been carrying on an affair behind my back for weeks, possibly longer, hit me like a physical blow. I excused myself to the bathroom and threw up everything in my stomach. When I returned to the table, Alex handed me his phone. "She sent this to me an hour ago, asking me to forward it to you, since you are not responding to her messages." It was an email from Natalie. I read it with trembling hands. "Simon, I know you will never forgive me, and I do not deserve forgiveness. This thing with Richard started a month ago when we met to discuss the surprise father-son fishing trip he was planning for after the honeymoon. Something happened between us. I was attracted to his confidence, his power, the way he talked about building his empire from nothing. It was wrong and inexcusable. I never meant to hurt you. I was going to end it. I swear. Please, just talk to me one last time." A month. They had been sleeping together for a month while I finalized our wedding plans, while I wrote my vows, while I pictured our future together. The next few days passed in a blur of pain and logistical nightmares. Canceling wedding arrangements was both heartbreaking and humiliating. Every vendor needed an explanation, and I found myself saying, "family emergency," so often the words lost all meaning. I stayed at Alex's place, unable to return to the apartment Natalie and I had shared. I agreed to meet Natalie once to return her things. We met at a public park where she arrived with puffy eyes and a trembling lip. She tried to touch my arm, but I stepped back. "I brought everything from the apartment that is yours. I will be moving out by the end of the month. The lease is paid through then." "Simon, please," she sobbed. "We can work through this. I made a terrible mistake. I do not even know why I did it. Your father, he can be very persuasive. Stop. I cut her off. Do not blame him. You both made choices. Adult choices. Every time you met him, every time you lied to me about where you were going, those were choices. I know, she whispered. I know that. I love you. Not him. It was never about love with him. That almost makes it worse, I replied, feeling suddenly exhausted. Goodbye, Natalie. While Natalie at least seemed genuinely remorseful, my father's approach was different. His voicemail started with apologies, but quickly devolved into attempts to downplay what had happened. These things happen, Simon. Men have needs. It was just physical nothing to throw away your future over. She still wants to marry you. His casual dismissal of his betrayal only reinforced my decision to cut him out of my life completely. I blocked his number and instructed the security desk at my office building not to allow him in if he showed up. I slipped into a dark depression, taking a leave of absence from work. I spent days barely getting out of bed, replaying memories and wondering how I could have been so blind. My friends tried their best to support me, but I pushed most of them away, unable to handle their pity or their awkward attempts to cheer me up. 2 weeks after I discovered the affair, I received an unexpected call from a number I did not recognize. I almost did not answer, but some instinct made me pick up. It was my father's doctor, Dr. Patel. She explained that my father had given permission for her to contact me regarding his medical condition. I almost hung up, but what she said next froze me in place. Mr. Wagner, I am sorry to inform you that your father has terminal pancreatic cancer. The diagnosis came 3 months ago, but he has been keeping it private. At this stage, we estimate he has approximately 3 months left. He has asked me to reach out because he has been unable to contact you directly. The news hit me in a complex wave of emotions. Shock, disbelief, a confusing mix of vindication and grief. Before I could fully process it, my phone beeped with another call. My father. With numb fingers, I accepted. I guess Dr. Patel reached you, he said, his voice weaker than I remembered. I need to see you, Simon. I need to explain. I know what I did was unforgivable, but I am dying. Please, son, give me a chance to make amends before it is too late. As I listened to his plea, something shifted inside me. Not forgiveness. Not yet, but the beginning of a plan. A way to make my father truly understand what he had done, not just to me, but throughout his life. A way to make his last days a reckoning. 1 week later, I sat across from my father in the living room of his mansion. He looked terrible. He had lost weight, his face gaunt, and skin sallow. The confident, larger-than-life man, who had dominated every room, was diminished physically, if not in spirit. Thank you for coming, he said, gesturing to the expensive whiskey he had poured for us both. I left mine untouched. I know. I do not deserve your forgiveness. Then, why am I here? I asked coldly. Because I am dying, he replied simply. And because, despite everything, you are my son, and I know there is good in you, more good than there ever was in me. He proceeded to explain how the cancer diagnosis had thrown him into an existential crisis, how facing his mortality had made him spiral into self-destructive behavior, including the affair with Natalie. He claimed it was about conquering death through some twisted expression of virility, that Natalie had been vulnerable to his manipulation because she was anxious about marriage. I was afraid, he admitted, afraid of dying alone with all my regrets. I wanted to feel powerful one more time. It was selfish and cruel, and I have no excuse. But I am asking for your forgiveness not because I deserve it, but because I do not want to leave things this way between us. I looked at this broken man and felt nothing but cold determination. I need time to process this, I said, but I am willing to try. The relief on his face was palpable. He reached across to squeeze my hand, an unusual display of affection from him. I let him already calculating my next steps. That night, while Richard slept, I went through his home office. I was looking for his will, curious about what arrangements he had made knowing his death was imminent. What I found sent a fresh wave of betrayal through me. He had updated his will just days after I discovered the affair. While the bulk of his estate would go to me, he had left a significant portion, including a vacation property in Aspen, and $500,000 to Natalie. My father was still providing for my ex-fiancée even after she was no longer going to be part of our family. The next morning I confronted him about it over breakfast. "You updated your will after I found you with Natalie. You are still taking care of her even now." He had the decency to look ashamed. I made promises to her. She was concerned about her future after what happened. I wanted to make sure she would be okay. Promises. When you were having an affair with your son's fiancée, those promises should have been null and void the minute I walked in on you two. He sighed, pushing his barely touched food away. "You are right. I will call my lawyer today and have it changed." I nodded, satisfied with this small victory. Then I made my proposition. "I want to move in here to help take care of you during your remaining time." His surprise was evident, but he quickly accepted, clearly grateful for the chance to rebuild our relationship. What he did not know was that I had already begun contacting his business associates, old friends, and rivals, gathering information about Richard Wagner's long career. My father had not built his construction empire by playing fair. There had always been rumors of cut corners, bribes to inspectors, and questionable labor practices. Now I was collecting evidence, piecing together the full picture of his unethical business dealings. Over the next few weeks, I established a routine of caring for my father, while secretly building my case against him. I cooked his meals, drove him to doctor appointments, and managed his medications. To the outside world, I was the devoted son reconciled with his dying father just in time. In reality, I was setting up the final act of our complicated relationship. The psychological aspect of my revenge was subtle, but effective. During our conversations, I would casually bring up incidents from my childhood times, when he had disappointed me or my mother. I would mention people he had wronged in business, as if reminiscing about old acquaintances. "Do you remember Tom Halston? I ran into his son last week. He mentioned how his father never recovered after your company took over his business and pushed him out." Each reminder would cause a flicker of discomfort on my father's face. He was too weak to defend himself the way he once would have, with bluster and self-justification. Now he could only absorb these small wounds, accumulating guilt with each one. I began inviting people from his past to visit, claiming it was good for him to reconnect while he still could. Each visitor brought their own history with Richard, and many could not resist mentioning old grievances. His former business partner mentioned the deal where Richard had taken credit for his idea. An ex-girlfriend recalled how he had strung her along with promises of marriage while still involved with someone else. With each visit, I could see Richard shrinking further into himself, the weight of his past pressing down on him as his body failed. He began apologizing more frequently, not just to me, but to everyone. It was as if he was trying to clear his cosmic balance sheet before time ran out. The most effective part of my plan came when I arranged a family gathering inviting relatives who had distanced themselves from Richard over the years. Cousins he had borrowed money from and never repaid. An uncle whose wife Richard had once made advances toward at a family wedding. A half-sister whose college fund he had promised to contribute to, then reneged on. I presented it as a chance for everyone to make peace with Richard before he passed. The dinner was tense, full of awkward silences and pointed remarks disguised as casual conversation. I skillfully guided the discussion toward family history, giving everyone an opportunity to reference Richard's many betrayals. "Remember when you promised to help with Aunt Linda's medical bills, Dad? She ended up having to sell her house. I always wondered what happened there." By dessert, Richard was visibly distressed, his hands shaking as he realized that his entire family saw him for what he truly was. A man who had spent his life taking what he wanted without regard for others. The legacy he had been so proud of was crumbling before his eyes. 3 days later, Richard's condition deteriorated dramatically. The doctors said it could be days, maybe hours. I sat by his bedside watching his labored breathing, knowing it was time for our final confrontation. "Dad," I said softly when he opened his eyes, "there is something I need to show you." I opened my laptop and began playing recordings of conversations I had had with his former accountant detailing tax fraud schemes Richard had implemented. Then emails from a city inspector admitting to taking bribes to overlook code violations in Richard's buildings. Documents showing unsafe working conditions that had led to injuries he had covered up with settlements and NDAs. "What are you doing?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I have been gathering evidence," I explained calmly, "about who you really are. After you die, I plan to release all of this. Your obituary will not celebrate a successful businessman and philanthropist. It will expose a fraud, a cheat, and a man who betrayed everyone who ever trusted him, right up to his own son." His eyes widened with panic. "Simon, please, you cannot do this. My legacy, it is all I have left. Your legacy," I leaned closer. "Your legacy died the moment you decided to sleep with the woman I loved. Now you will be remembered for exactly who you were." Tears filled his eyes. And for once, I believed they were genuine. "I know I have failed you. Failed everyone. Please, son, do not let this be how I am remembered. Let me try to make amends." I watched him struggling for breath, begging for mercy, and suddenly felt a strange emptiness where my anger had been. This broken man, reduced to pleading for his reputation from the son he had betrayed, was punishment enough. The revenge I had so carefully orchestrated no longer felt satisfying. It felt hollow, and worse, it felt like I was becoming just like him. In that moment, watching my father weep, I saw myself clearly for the first time in weeks. The meticulous planning, the manipulation, the cold calculation. I had become what I despised most about him. The realization was like cold water on my face, waking me from a dark dream. "Dad," I said, closing the laptop, "I am not going to release any of this." He looked at me with confusion, not trusting this sudden change. "Why not after what I did to you, to your mother, to everyone?" "Because I am not you," I said simply, "and I do not want to be." We sat in silence for several minutes, the beeping of his monitors the only sound in the room. When he spoke again, his voice had a different quality, devoid of the manipulation and self-interest that had colored it throughout my life. "I have never been a good father to you, Simon, or a good husband. To your mother. I always thought I could make up for it with money, with things. I thought that was what mattered." He paused, struggling for breath. "I was wrong. So wrong. About everything." For the first time, I felt he was speaking from a place of genuine remorse, not just fear of punishment or death. We talked for hours that night, having the first real conversation of our lives. He told me about his own father, an abusive alcoholic he had vowed never to emulate, not realizing he was creating his own kind of damage. He spoke about my mother with genuine regret, acknowledging the pain he had caused her and taking responsibility for her depression. When he spoke about Natalie, he did not offer excuses. "I saw a chance to take something from you to prove I still could." It was not about her. It was about my own insecurity, my fear of becoming irrelevant as I was dying. It was cruel and unforgivable. I did not offer forgiveness, not explicitly, but I did offer presence. I promised to stay with him until the end, to be the son he had never deserved but desperately needed now. The next morning, Richard asked his lawyer to visit. He formally updated his will, removing Natalie entirely and redirecting much of his estate to charities, including a substantial donation to a suicide prevention organization in my mother's name. He asked me to help him make calls to people he had wronged, offering apologies that came too late, but were sincere nonetheless. He died 2 days later in the early hours of the morning. I was holding his hand when he took his last breath, a peaceful end to a troubled life. As I sat there in the quiet room, I felt an unexpected sense of peace myself. Not happiness, not closure exactly, but a weight lifted. The revenge I had planned would have chained me to anger and bitterness long after he was gone. By letting it go, I had freed myself. The funeral was small, attended mostly by business associates and the family members who had come to our dinner. Natalie came standing at the back of the service. I approached her afterward, our first meeting since that day in the park. "I am sorry for your loss," she said, her eyes red from crying. "Despite everything I know, he was your father. Thank you for coming," I replied, surprised by the lack of anger I felt toward her now. "It means something that you did, Simon." She began, but I shook my head. "We do not need to do this again. I appreciate the gesture of coming today. I wish you well, Natalie. Truly." And I meant it. The rage that had consumed me had burned itself out, leaving clarity in its place. As executor of the estate, I handled the distribution of my father's assets. I made sure the charitable donations were completed as specified. I reached out to some of the people he had wronged financially and offered what restitution I could not, out of obligation but because it felt right. 6 months after my father's death, I was in a better place. I had started seeing a therapist to work through my complex feelings of grief, betrayal, and the shame of how close I had come to my own moral compromise. I had rebuilt my friendship with Alex and strengthened connections with other friends who had stood by me through the worst of it. I had begun dating again cautiously. Nothing serious, but enough to know that I could trust again someday. I had used part of my inheritance to start my own software development company, built on principles of transparency and ethical business practices, the opposite of my father's approach. The most important lesson I learned from that terrible chapter of my life was not about betrayal or revenge, but about choice. We all face moments that can define us, push us toward becoming someone we never wanted to be. My father made his choices over a lifetime small compromises that eventually corrupted him completely. I had stood at that same precipice, ready to jump into the same darkness. Stepping back was the hardest and most important decision I ever made. The cycles of toxic behavior, betrayal and hurt can continue through generations unless someone has the courage to break them. In those final days with my father, I chose a different path, not for his sake, but for my own. Forgiveness was not about excusing what he did, but about freeing myself from the prison of resentment and revenge. I still think about my father often, not with the white-hot anger I once felt, but with a complex mixture of sadness, understanding, and gratitude for the lesson his life and death taught me. In the end, the greatest revenge against those who hurt us is not making them suffer, but refusing to let their actions define us or determine who we become. Has someone's betrayal ever made you contemplate revenge? Did you go through with it or find another way forward? Share your experience in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit like and subscribe for more real-life stories about healing from betrayal. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is break the cycle rather than perpetuate it. Share this story if you know someone who might need to hear this message today.